What's up, guys? So we're at the Greenbrier this week, and last week was a good week for us. We had a solid 6 of 8 on FanDuel here. Let's see where we're at. Let's pull this lineup up. Yeah, so last week we had finished really high in pretty much every contest. We had the winner, Kyle Stanley. Steele and Chappell were two high-end guys that I was really confident in, but Steele was the super chalk, so that didn't really hurt us. But Chappell, there wasn't really he was just underpriced relative to his odds and his potential in this tournament. So I really liked him. He just didn't come through. But Leishman, Lingmerth, Stanley, and Streelman and Lee really came through for us. Schauffele was a cheap guy, and he made the cut. He did well. Spoiler alert, we're going to be back on the Schauffele train a little bit this week, but Kyle Stanley won't be in this tournament. Leishman is not either. Steele is not. Chappell is not. So a lot of these guys I do like again this week. I'm going to have... well, we'll get there. We'll talk about them. But yeah, 6 of 8 was good enough with the winner and a lot of other high finishes to get a very, very solid performance last week. A lot of people had DeLaet in cash last week, I saw, and that did not go so well for them. He missed the cut. But we'll talk about him, but I like him for this week. So moving back to the stats page there. When I go to this online page this week, it's going to be last 24 rounds. So, around the last 6 to 8 tournaments that these guys have played in. The stats I'm going to focus on the most are going to be strokes gained tee to green. Putting isn't really too key here. So, tee to green seems to be the most, the best indicator of success over putting. Approach shots are going to be really important just because the fairways here are really wide. It's not a super long course, but off the tee it doesn't tend to favor bombers or accuracy guys. So approach shots are going to be key. Around the green, kind of important, just kind of a separating stat. I'm not going to weigh it heavily. And then putting, always like to see a good putter, but there have been guys here that have done really well without being world-class putters, so I'm not going to really take putting into account too much. But a lot of these guys that you see on the top of the list here I will be on, and I think some of them make for good value plays, but we'll go back to the spreadsheet here. All these bold stats are ones that I'm really looking at. If I have them highlighted in green, that means I really like them for cash. Get some more highlights in here, but yeah, so I have it sorted by DraftKings price just because that's where more people are playing. But yeah, I think I'm going heavier on FanDuel this week. I like the way I'm building lineups over there a lot more. DraftKings really tightened up the pricing and really boosted a lot of these guys. Like Streelman, 8,900 this week, was 7,400 last week, and he was very chalky over there. But this week he will not be very chalky at 8,900, and he just doesn't fit my build, especially with a couple other guys around him that I like more. But we're going to start at the top with Patrick Reed. He's been pretty hot recently, trending upwards, and I really like him this week. He's just expensive as hell, and like I said, there's not much value that I'm in love with. So I just don't think I'm going to be able to get there this week. I don't mind the play, but I think you're sacrificing a lot with your build if you go there. You'll have to fit a few of these lower end guys that I'm talking about later, but I'll probably throw Patrick Reed in a GPP. But my thing is he's going to be highly owned, so I don't know if I need to do it necessarily in order to have a lineup that I think can really do well this week. So I think I'll do it just because if he wins, he'll be on the winning lineup. So I'll just have to find some other guys that I like in the lower range and throw together some Reed lineups that way. But Bill Haas is a guy that I'm going to probably just have all my exposure to on FanDuel. That price is way too cheap. Second highest odds to win, same odds as Kisner, but $700 cheaper than Kiz. There's no reason not to have Bill Haas in cash this week, unless you like Finau more. But I think Finau could be, I don't know, one of these guys is going to be very chalky. I don't see both of them being super chalky just because fitting both of them is kind of difficult. With a couple $100 value you can get on other guys. I'll probably have a lineup or two with Haas and Finau, but I don't think you have to do that. But I do really like Bill Haas this week. The par threes on this course, they all, outside of one, so there's 3 par threes that fall into this 200 to 225 range, and he is the best on tour in that range. He's great at bogey avoidance, which correlates well for winners here in the past. His approach game is on fire right now. Putting, not quite there, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. And then, par fours, he's been all right, but he's super solid. He's made the last 4 cuts, and he's had high finishes in each. So when you look at him on FanDuel at that price, I like him a little more than Finau over there. At that price, I mean, he's finished higher than Finau in each of the last 4 tournaments that he's played in versus Finau's last 4. So although Finau has more hype because of his DraftKings price, I think on FanDuel, maybe you get a lower ownership on Haas, but I don't know if you do because of the odds. We'll have to wait and see, but Finau has been talked up the most this week, and it's not really even close. So Finau is going to be the mega chalk on DraftKings, but Haas on FanDuel I think is a very, very solid play, and that's probably where I'm going to start my lineup for cash. I don't see a reason to spend the $700 more for Kisner. Although I do really like Kisner this week, he could just kind of have his focus on the British Open or the Open Championship, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter, next week, because, he's been talked up a little bit for that tournament too. He may just want to get out of here this week, and I think, Kisner's a great play. I mean, I don't really need to go into the stats too much. They kind of speak for themselves, but the history is interesting. He had a second place last year with 3 missed cuts the 3 times he's played before that, but he's a different player now. Kisner hasn't been leading the PGA Tour in stat categories in the past, before like this year. He really stepped his game up this year, so when you see that, I wouldn't weigh that too much. But I don't think I need to go there in cash or on either site. He's in play for tournaments, but I think he will be owned pretty heavily, so you could just fade and hope he goes out there and enjoys the Greenbrier resort for a few days and then gets out of here and goes over to the UK for the next week. But Webb Simpson is a guy that kind of just skip Phil, mainly because I just don't want any part of Phil this week. He's over 3 here. He just fired his caddy. He may be low owned because of those things, but I just don't really want him. Phil's game hasn't changed that much in the past 4 years, unlike Kisner's. And Phil, he just hasn't done well here in the past. I think he's here because it's a promotional thing, and then he knows the British Open is next week, so he's just going to get the hell out of here and go over there. I think I don't really know what he's going to do here. It's interesting. I don't know. It's tough for me to gauge him here. His ball striking has been a little erratic. Mainly his, I think his off the tee game has been wild. But this course doesn't really penalize you for that. But at the same time, it's easier to score when you're in the fairway. That's pretty obvious. But so I have to say I like Kisner more than Phil. On both sites at that price. I'll probably just fade Phil and hope for the best. Webb Simpson is a guy that's been, he took a week off, but he's been hot recently, and I like to see that. But He's just been solid. I think he's definitely in play for cash on both sites this week. He's super underpriced on FanDuel, so I think most of my cash cash build is going to start Haas, Simpson, um, potentially Finau, Simpson, potentially Finau, Haas, Simpson, but some some kind of combination of those guys. I think two of the three are going to be in my cash lineup. Um, but yeah, he's in play on DraftKings too. He kind of fits my last spot. I kind of build from the bottom up, and and then I tweak to get the top guy that I'm comfortable with in there, just because I am comfortable with a lot of the top guys. So I don't really care if I'm on like Webb or Lingmerth, but I think Webb's upside is a little more. As you can see with his course history, he has a third, a seventh, and a ninth here. And he's had some miscuts, but he kind of struggled a lot last year. So I don't really mind that miscut last year. His game is back to where it was before, trending up, so I don't mind that at all. Yeah, just a really solid play this week overall. Lingmerth, man, last week Lingmerth came out super hot fire and faded on Sunday like he normally does, which I think might scare people off a little bit this week, but I don't think you can ignore him at that FanDuel price. It's way too cheap. He does really well at this course, hasn't finished lower than 16th. And his form is great right now. So it's hard for me to get around Lingmerth. I mean, if he were to go out there and just kind of like putts around, and hang his hat because he blew it again last week, I wouldn't be surprised, but I think the ownership will be like Steele last week, where if that happens, our plays are going to be strong enough elsewhere where it's not going to hurt us too much. He's going to be the Kyle Stanley of ownership this week on FanDuel, and I'm fine with eating that ownership because I think Lingmerth could go out there and win. When he kind of bombed on Sunday before, he came out and finished 18th. I forget what tournaments those were, but I remember that being the result. So really like him this week. I think you play him both formats on FanDuel, eat that chalk. There are some pivots in that range, but I think Lingmerth is the best play, and I'm not really a big ownership person. I like cash games more than GPPs. It's double my money and get out of there. So I'm gonna take some Lingmerth this week. Bubba, this is basically his home course, not where he grew up, but where he lives now. Very Bubba place, the old white TPC at Greenbrier Resort. But he's done really well here in the past, but he's been so bad recently that I can't go there. I'll let other people go there and hope Bubba sucks again. I did the same thing at the Travelers course where Bubba has 2 wins and hadn't missed any cuts, and he was amazing, and he went out there and he sucked, and I was so happy that he sucked because it just killed a lot of people's lineups and makes it easier for me. So I'm fine with just fading Bubba and letting other people take him this week. Charles Howell the third is someone that I'm really torn on this week. I wasn't on him so much at a very, very, very good price last week. Coming off injury layoff, I was worried that he might be popular and he might kind of have this, residual, hangover from his injury. And he went out there and he lost to Kyle Stanley in the playoff. So, I was happy that Stanley beat him because I would have been pissed that I wasn't on the winner. But, I did not see that happening last week for Howell. And it's really interesting here. He's a guy that, doesn't go out and shoot super low scores, which is why he did so well last week. He's never, a super, birdie maker, as you can see. His birdie or better stat is only 83rd on tour. And, I do want to mention, all the stats that you'll see birdie or better and over are going to be are going to be on tour for the whole year, and the strokes gained stats the last 24 rounds in this field. So you're going to see there aren't too many high numbers, but when you do see one of the high numbers in these categories, you want to probably avoid that guy. That's kind of why I'm off Bubba. He can't putt right now. His par 4 stats have been bad. He's just been living on par 5s, and I don't like to see that. But Howell, super good at bogey avoidance, but I think that's part of his problem here recently. He has a ninth here, but he has 3 missed cuts. He has a 52nd, a 32nd. So I just don't know if the upside is really there for him this week. He showed it last week. He qualified for the Open. And I think he may just kind of take it easy this week. He may not go out there and try to win the thing like he did last week, motivated, coming off injury. So I'm probably just going to avoid him. I haven't been really building around him on FanDuel. That's where I would build around him with that price, same as Lingmerth, and both of them are going to be popular. But I just don't know about him this week. Besides last week, he didn't show any upside this year, really. So, at a big scoring event, I just don't know if this is the time to play Charles Howell. And, my initial build doesn't have him. I have an alternative build that basically swapping down from Webb, getting Charles Howell in there. But I think I like the Webb play better. And I think I'm just going to stick to my guns with Webb and go there. Just kind of a feel thing. I'm not sure if I need to sacrifice Webb to get Charles Howell in there. Just not really sure about it. But Danny Lee's a guy that I'm definitely going to have on both sites this week. He's just been on fire. He's won here before. He has a 16th here in his most recent 2 starts. He's been killing it with his putter recently, and putting is noisy, as I say, but Danny Lee is also a good putter. He's been gaining strokes with his putter for 2 months, and at some point you just have to say the guy's a really good putter, and it's not noise. He crushes the par 4 range that I'm looking at this week. He crushes the par 4 range that some of the par 4s, but not most, are at this week. The par 3s are serviceable. Tee to green, he's been fire. Approach is fire. I just don't see a reason not to play Danny Lee this week on both sites. I like Danny Lee more than Webb, I would say, but Webb is fine. But yeah, Lee has been he's been great here. So another guy that's been great here is Keegan Bradley, a guy that whenever I play in cash, he goes out and misses the cut. And I never play him unless he has great course history, which he does this week, but this course fits him really well. It's a course where he can hit his driver, he can get close on the greens, he can make birdies, and, it fits him well. 29th, 4th, 46th, 43rd, I can see an outcome anywhere in that range this week. I don't see him going out and screwing me over. So I'm just going to play him, elite ball striker here. I like that. And last week he was fine. He's doing what he does. He's getting, he's making cuts right now, and, he's due for a blow-up week, but I don't think it's this week. So I'm going to ride the Keegan wave one more week. Russell Henley down below him is a guy that I want to take a deeper statistical look at here. Henley. I always like to see strokes gained approach when I'm looking at a guy, but he's been bad strokes gained approach recently, which is really interesting because it's a stat that he's normally good with. Back at the Shell when he won, he was good, but ever since then, it's kind of been a decline. He's normally in the positives in his stat, and then he switched his irons around the time of between the U.S. Open and the Quicken Loans. And when he switched his irons, he went straight to shit with his irons. His approach game has been bad, but he's been kind of saving it off the tee and putting. So 46th last week at Quicken. My problem with Henley is I don't see him just sucking this much again with his irons. He has really good results here in the past. 5th and 30th, that's what you'd like to see, but man, if his putter goes a little cold and he doesn't really do so well off the tee and the approach game is still bad, he's going to struggle. So right now I'm kind of fading Henley, and I'd rather probably play Howell over him on FanDuel. I don't know if that's I don't know. I'd honestly rather just avoid both of these guys, play Lingmerth and move on, and take guys in different ranges that I am not so conflicted about. But it's just that recent approach stat with Henley that I really don't like. So I don't know what I'm gonna do with him. But I'm not really sold on playing him in cash this week. I think he'll be pretty popular actually. So um, I wouldn't I wouldn't mind playing him, but I don't know if I'm going to go there. Just because that approach stat is very, very concerning right now. And on a course where you're going to need to make birdies to do really well, it's going to be hard for him to do that if he's losing strokes on his approaches. He was doing the same last week, losing strokes on approach, picking some back up with his putter, and that's why he kind of had a middling finish. But if Russell Henley goes out there at 7,700 on FanDuel and gets you a 46th place, you're not going to really complain about that. So I don't know where to go with him. It's like one of those things where you could just play him and, hope he doesn't miss the cut because he tends not to miss cuts, but it's going to be a situation I just tend to avoid. DraftKings at that price, I'd rather just play any of these four guys really around this range. Especially Finau. He's going to be the chalk of the week on DraftKings. He's super underpriced. The odds say it too. FanDuel, I like him, but I think I like Haas at the same price basically for a little less. Although Finau, I think, is a great play. I may play two cash lines this week, one with just Haas and one with Haas and Finau. Kind of see where I can build the rest of my lineup off of those guys. But Finau is a guy that you lock and load this week. I don't think you think twice about it. In GPPs on DraftKings, I think he's worth a fade because he's going to be so chalky. But on FanDuel, I think he's just in play in all formats. I don't know how chalky he's going to be over there. Streelman is a guy I think you lock and load on FanDuel at 6,600. That price is too cheap. 4 top 20s in a row. Hasn't really done super well at this course before, but looking at his past stats at this course, I looked at them earlier. He just hasn't. So these are his recent stats on tour. He was super hot with his putter, and now he's kind of just hot everywhere. But if you search Greenbrier, he wasn't. Approach game was bad. Putting was bad. Around the green, bad. When he had that 56th, his putting was bad, and it seems like he's found the putter recently, and that's kind of what's getting him in part to these good results. Around the green, he's been solid off the tee approach, so I like him a lot this week. I think at 6,600 you play him, and there's not much downside to it. I think he has the potential to go out there and do what he's been doing and get you a top 20 again. He's going to be super popular too, just because of what he's been doing lately. So I think Kevin Streelman is definitely in play. James Hahn is a guy that also over on FanDuel I will have in cash because he's just been solid here, and his stats line up here really well. Tee to green, he's been great. Approach been great. Par 4 ranges that I like for this week, he's been great. And yeah, I think James Hahn is just a good play this week at that price, especially considering his odds. I don't see much downside to it. There's a lot of upside there with the 6th place in 2015 here, so I like that play a lot. KOKRAK is going to be my sneaky play of the week. I don't think a lot of people are going to be on him. I'm not going to play him on DraftKings at that price. That price is bonkers for KOKRAK, but that FanDuel price is way too cheap for him right now. Normally, he's a guy that is like in the 5Ks, high 4Ks even some weeks, but back when FanDuel had that rounds 1 and 2 format, I would just plug him in the round 1 spot because, he would just go out there and do well. But recently he is, this is the stat that really sold me on KOKRAK this week. So, doing this statistical analysis of KOKRAK, he's been just on fire with his irons, gaining over 6 strokes a week. On approach, his off-the-tee game has been solid, but the putting is not really what's been there. Now, what I looked at next was Greenbrier. So his results here in the past, he's not been good on approach, but approaches tend to be, something that a golfer is more solid with week to week. If your iron play is on, tends to stay on, um, and then kind of fade. It doesn't tend to just go, just off game one week. But off the tee, he's been solid here in the past, so I think that continues this week. I think his approach game turns into what it has been recently, and I think his putter here, I think he knows something with these greens. So I really like KOKRAK this week. I think he is a sleeper to win. I think he's a sleeper to top 10. And I haven't heard much talk about him. I've heard talk about some other guys in his 6K range, like Patrick Rogers, Morgan Hoffman. Curtis Luck is a guy that you can definitely throw in GPPs. Matt Jones is a guy that's going to be popular this week at that range. But I like KOKRAK the best, and I think I've spelled out a pretty good case for him there. I don't see much reason not to go with KOKRAK at that range. The odds makers like him, and they tend to be sharp. So I'm going to go in with KOKRAK and cash this week, probably in that range. That lower range is going to be. I don't even shop at Bonton, so I don't know why I get that email. Streelman, Hahn, and KOKRAK right there. They're high priced on DraftKings, and DraftKings tends to moderate their pricing a little better than FanDuel does. You may have picked up on that. So KOKRAK, Hahn, Streelman, I love them this week over on FanDuel. Sung Kang is a guy that I'm going to stay away from this week. He does not tend to do well at this course. He hasn't even really been that great statistically recently. He just did really well last week. And I think he may have his sights. He qualified for the British Open Championship last week with his performance. I think he may have his eyes a little set on that, with it being a bigger tournament than this one, and this being a tournament that he hasn't done well at. So I think he may just kind of get out of here and go over to the UK. So I'm just not going to be on him. I don't see a reason to be at his price on either site. Really, he's just not a guy I'm big on. JB Holmes, fade for me this week. He's been really good at this course before, but I can't get behind the guy that's been this bad. He has shown no upside recently. The U.S. Open, he did well, but that was a course that's tailor-made for him, that he could just bomb it out there, and do well. Plus, it's a big tournament where I feel like, he really had some extra motivation to go out there and do really well. This week, I just don't see the reason to go with him when he's been in such bad form. But I think, especially at that FanDuel price, that is bonkers. I'd rather take any guy in the 8K range over him, even Bubba probably. But yeah, I'm just not going to have any JB this week. I'll let people go there and hope he misses the cut. And I think he can. I mean, he just hasn't been that great. Graham DeLaet is a guy that I was kind of on last week. I ended up not really going there so much, but that FanDuel price is really tempting. The DraftKings price is good. He keeps fitting my build, and he's 4 for 4 here. So when you look at course history, Graham DeLaet, like I've said in weeks past, he's a guy that tends to do well at certain courses because they fit his game. He's very bad around the greens. And what do we know about Greenbrier? It's easy to hit fairways, and it's easy, when you're hitting fairways, it's easier to hit greens. Graham DeLaet, 9th in ball striking, 3rd in strokes gained approach in his last 24 rounds, 28th tee to green, 10th on these par 3s, pretty good at bogey avoidance. So I think he's definitely a solid play this week. Always a little risky with Graham DeLaet. I don't think he's going to go out there and win this thing, but I think he is definitely in play back 2 weeks ago at the, Travelers, a course that he's done really well at in the past. Him and Keegan are the same kind of player, where they struggle in one area of their game, and that tends to hold them back. But at the courses that they tend to do well, they continue to tend to do well. So I'm going to be in on DeLaet this week in cash on both sites. I think I like Streelman a little more than him, but it's really tough for me to say. That miscut last week kind of a concern, but last week's course was much tougher than I expected it to be, and I think that really hurt DeLaet. With a lot of the greens being harder to hit, and his around the green game holding him back again. I mean, looking at the stats again for DeLaet, just to kind of reinforce what we're saying here. He tends to be solid with his approach game. Gaining 4 strokes, 2.8, 2.5 off the tee. He's positive pretty much every week. Around the green, though, man, that's where he really suffers. And then his putting tends to fluctuate, but last week it just wasn't there. Around the green wasn't there. But approach game last week was a tougher course. But Greenbrier in the past for him, killing it with the irons. And then the putting kind of fluctuates. But like I said, I think the putting is going to be there this week for him. I think he's going to be around neutral. With these greens being easier to hit, I can't see his around the green game hurting him too much, and I think his ball striking game off the tee and approach combined are going to get him through the cut this week, and I think that's all we really need from him at that price. I like Graham DeLaet a lot. I like Streelman a lot, and just that course history bump I think goes to DeLaet. So if I had to favor one over the other, I think it would be DeLaet over Streelman, but Streelman has been hotter overall, so it's tough to say between those two. I don't really have a preference, but I think the course history bump goes to DeLaet, and I think Streelman will be more popular with that recent form, and people not really looking at DeLaet's overall game. They don't understand kind of who he is as a golfer. So I'm going to go back to DeLaet. I hope he's the kind of lower-owned play in that range than Streelman, and I probably will have both of them in my cash lineup, but if I had to choose one, it would probably be DeLaet. Love Mark is a guy I just never really play. Whenever I do play him, he goes out and bombs, and he hasn't done well here in the past. He didn't really do too well last week, so I'm just going to fade him and hope he kind of continues to slump. He's been fine recently, but I think that U.S. Open performance is kind of still like buoying his ownership. Sean O'Hare's a guy that can do really well at this course. He's shown it before, 13th and 7th in 2 of his last 4 tries, but he also has 2 missed cuts. In this field, the last 24 rounds, he's just kind of been average, which isn't going to get it done at either of those prices for me this week. So I'm going to fade Sean O'Hare and just hope he misses the cut. Ogilvy popped last week statistically and on the course, which was weird. I didn't talk about him just because I'm not going to spend time talking about Ogilvy. I just don't recommend playing him this week at either price. That FanDuel price may be appealing to you, but I'm not going there. There's no way in hell. The X-Man, Xander Schauffele. He's a very good price again this week on FanDuel, and his price went down on DraftKings, and he is fitting my build really well this week. I like his odds. I like where his game is at right now. He's a great ball striker. So I like Xander in cash this week on both sites. The problem is he's in the same range on FanDuel as both of these guys, Streelman and DeLaet. And, his approach game hasn't been, on fire recently, but, he's been getting the job done somehow. Quicken, very tough course last week, and he did well. But, I always get worried when I see this kind of, 48, 52nd, 5th is kind of like the peak, and then, a little downturn, and then a little more of a downturn. So I'm not too worried about Xander this week. I think his off-the-tee game is going to be pretty all right here. He's never played the Greenbrier before, but I think this is a course that fits his game really well, so I don't mind taking a shot on Xander. I just think that, overall you look at long-term form for these guys, and, Xander was missing a bunch of cuts before, and so is Streelman and DeLaet, kind of streaky, but I think, DeLaet and Streelman are better golfers overall. But I don't mind Xander this week either. I don't really see myself, besides GPPs, playing Streelman, DeLaet, and Xander. My initial build had it, but then I realized I could get another top guy and fit KOKRAK and be kind of just as comfortable. So there's that for Xander. Jimmy Walker's been really bad recently. His he had/has Lyme disease, so he's been rough. But he's killed this course before. 2 missed cuts, but a second, fourth, and fourth. So kind of like other guys with good history with bad form here, I'm going to kind of just take a wait and see on Walker. Mainly because there's a legitimate reason I think he's been playing badly, so I'm just going to kind of fade that. Gary Woodland has been out for a while, and he hasn't really crushed at all this year, but he had some personal problems, and he and his wife lost one of their twins, but she just gave birth to the other twin successfully last weekend, so he was out of the Quicken Loans for that, but he is back this week on a course that he's done really well at before. I think he has a 4th place here before, but yeah, he's just a great ball striker, and I think this is a perfect course for him to come back in good spirits and potentially flash some upside. So I'm going to have him on DraftKings. His price is just too good over there. FanDuel, I'm not finding myself rostering him at that price. I like Lingmerth, probably Howell a little better. Henley, I'd take a shot on probably before Woodland. And then there's another guy here, Ollie Schniederjans, just a solid golfer, hasn't really flashed upside lately, or at all really this year, but he's a guy that I think at that price on DraftKings can go get you a made cut, and you can kind of, count that and move on with it. Hasn't played this course before, but I like him as a player. I think he's a solid golfer overall, and his stats kind of support that. He hasn't really just gone out and really killed it anywhere this year, but he is a very solid player. Yeah, I do worry a little bit about Ollie, but around the greens, I think Quicken was just a tough course around the greens, which was bad for him. The iron play does worry me a little bit. It's kind of tailed off, so I may try to pivot off of Ollie, to be honest, and maybe go a little differently with that build. Maybe swap 2 of these guys out. But yeah, right now I'm fine with him. But it's the more I look at him, the more it worries me, and the more I do not like it. So yeah, I'm gonna have to try to do something about that. I have in one of my cash lineups, but I'm not sold on it, so I'm going to try to probably move off him to someone else in this range, but this range, man, it kind of sucks. Like, between Schauffele and my boy Stuart Cink, who is a cash lock on DraftKings, there's not much else that I see here that I like. Even Curtis Luck, a guy, I'm not going to really talk too much about these other guys. Potter has great history, but ever since his win, he's trailed off here. He's on the web.com tour now, which is like the AAA baseball of golf. He's been all right, but not great. Grayson Murray keeps making cuts, but he blew up in his final round at the Quicken, so I'm just not really sure. You could play Grayson in cash over Ollie this week. Wouldn't hate it. But yeah, his driver just went nutso last week in that round. He was spraying everything. Approach game has been solid, recently, but yeah, that off the tee last week was not good, and I don't really want to see that. I mean, he hasn't really done that before, so I don't really know what to make of that. His irons have been fine recently, but man, that off the tee game was bad last week, and that was mainly only in one round, really. So, I don't know. I'd like to think that's an aberration, but it's definitely not something I'm going to bank on in cash. That's for sure. Moving on, Stroud has done really well here, but his recent form is not great. Patrick Rogers has some recent form, but it's mostly come through his putting. So that concerns me. He's done all right here before, but I'd like to see a little better. Morgan Hoffman is a guy that I think is really interesting. He isn't a guy I really play ever, but he's done well here in the past. And he's done well here in the past. So it's just the approach game has been really bad, and I find trouble trusting, 5 weeks in a row of losing strokes on approach and kind of riding your putter around the green and off the tee game to, top 25 finishes. I don't think that happens here this week. I think you have to have your irons pretty dialed in to do really well here, and right now he just doesn't have that. In his past times at the Greenbrier, his approach game has been way better. And the time it wasn't, he missed the cut. So I'm going to avoid Hoffman this week. Harris English is a guy that I am really intrigued by this week. His approach game has been solid recently. He's been crushing these par threes, but as you will see, he has the Grayson Murray syndrome where, his off the tee game has been bad. He's been losing strokes off the tee pretty much every week for the past, this entire season, really. That is a lot of red in a row. His approach game, though, has been on fire. So, the one thing we do know about the greens here is that the fairways are really wide, they're easy to hit. One of the easiest on tour. So for Harris English, a guy that keeps spraying the ball around, he may have a chance to do really well here. So I'm going to go back and look. Not English, Greenbrier. I'm tired. Off the tee, missed the cut here before. I don't know about English. It's tough to say. He's only played here once. It was 2012. But, just kind of looking at where he's been recently, his spraying his driver around, that still could hurt him because I feel like this is a course where you want to put yourself in good positions to make birdies and really get up the leaderboard on a course where, like minus 15 is probably going to be the winner. The approach game has been fine, but if you can't get the ball where you want it off the tee, and, he got better at it last week, though. So, I don't know. I think English is fine, and I think I might play him over Ollie and then make a little pivot in that lineup. And then kind of ride or die there with Mr. English. But, these other tournaments, too, where, like, Colonial, St. Jude, these are courses where it is not easy to succeed if you are having a bad driving week. But his approach game has picked him up both of these times. So I think this is a week where I hope... See, that's the thing. I don't want to hope that his iron game is, this on point again, because I don't know if it will be. But his off-the-tee game has not been good. So it's going to be really tough for me to trust him in cash just looking at those stats. And, even in these other tournaments where he was losing strokes, these are not hard tournaments. These are not world-class tournaments here. So his irons must have been on point at the U.S. Open. We don't have the stats for that, but, he's hard for me to trust, and I don't know if I can go there. Curtis Luck is a guy that did really well last week. And I'm definitely not playing English at that price on FanDuel. Curtis Luck, a guy that is very well priced and did really well last week, but his putter was the main reason. And, I'm not going to trust a guy that's been all over the place with his putter. His approach game hasn't been great. His driver hasn't been great. And he's really not shown super high upside without a solid, not solid, but world-class putting performance. So I'm not going to go back to Luck this week. I think he's going to be very chalky based on that high performance last week, but I don't like to trust hot putters. Blixt, he's won here before, but he's been bad. Cink, lock and load, baby, on DraftKings. He is my lock of the week in cash, along with Woodland and Finau. So those three are going to be the starts of my cash lineup. If I had to have a core in cash, it's going to be those three, and then kind of build from there. Matt Jones is a guy that's really interesting. I like him a lot this week for a low-priced guy. He's just been really solid, and he's a second place here and a missed cut, but he's just not been doing badly, in any area of the game. He's been solid around the greens. His putter's been meh. but off the tee he's been meh. Approach game has been pretty average, but when he puts it all together, he can get a top 20 finish. He's shown it at the Valero, he's shown it at St. Jude, and Valero is a course that he's done really well in the past. But these other weeks where he kind of middles about in a lot of areas, he tends to finish around like 60s. Makes the cut but doesn't have upside. But I still just worry that he doesn't have what it takes to really make sure he gets through the cut, and that worries me. So last year at Greenbrier, what did he do? The putter, carried him really high. His approach game was on fire, and the putter was there. So I'm not going to really ride that. Plus, it was back in 2013. So, for me, I think it's another avoid situation where, it looks good on paper, but, I'll let other people go there. Not for me and not in cash. Scott Brown is a guy that, he's done pretty decently here in the past, but I just can't really trust him. Not a guy I trust. John Hahn is another guy that I do not trust. Smiley Kaufman, another guy I do not trust. Never played here in the past, but his game tends to look like it would fit this course pretty well. He's good in this par 3 range that I'd like to look at, or par 4 range, excuse me. So I like Smiley, but not a guy I'm really sold on. Ricky Barnes is interesting. Not great history here, but he's been solid in the his past few tournaments. So, looking at that, I like to ride for him, but, I don't know about this guy. I don't know about Ricky Barnes, man. But the approach game's been there. The putter's been all right. The off the tee game hasn't been great, but I think this is a course where you can get away with it not being great. Past times here at the Greenbrier, his approach game, when he's done well, his approach game has been pretty much what it is now, and the putter has been fine. So I don't mind Barnes this week. It's definitely a risk. He is Ricky Barnes. But I don't know. It's really tough to say because if I had to drop in price from Ollie to a guy, it's tough not to like Barnes down there with his recent form and what stats he's been good with recently. So I think Barnes is in play. Cash GPP on DraftKings. I'm not going to go there on FanDuel. I just don't see a reason to. But next guy, Michael Kim. Let's go take a look at Michael Kim. A lot of Kims. Where are we at here? There we go. All right, Michael Kim, a guy that his approach game came to life last week, but before that he wasn't very great. Greenbrier before made cut, but it was mostly just kind of a good putting week. Didn't really do anything else well. So if I had to pick one, I'd pick Barnes. I might actually go down and do that with Barnes, and then just move most of the action on that cash line up to my other line, and just kind of have Barnes a little hedge action there. I like Barnes over Kim. Kirk is a guy that I'm just not really going to be on. Von Taylor, same thing. Seamus Powers really popped the past few weeks. He's been all right. History here. Let's pull up young Seamus. I think he's all right here, but approach game has been solid recently. The putter has really let him down, which is keeping him hitting that upside. Off the tee has been solid. Greenbrier's never played it, though, so that's a little bit of a red flag for me. I definitely think he could do well here, but I kind of like the Ricky Barnes, how we can see, what's really carried him, at Greenbrier before. So I like Ricky a little more than I like Power this week. But Power's in play. You can definitely play him. It's just, he could have one of these middling in every aspect weeks and miss the cut. So that worries me. I think Barnes is in better form right now. Besides those guys, not really anyone else I love down there. Sean Stephanie's done well here in the past. 3 of 3 made cuts. Tom Hoge, Hoge, I don't even know how you want to say that name, but he's been all right here in the past as well. one tournament here did well. Travelers, he did well, but super great week on approaches. Hasn't done that all year, so I'm not going to weigh that too much. Chad Campbell's a guy I think can do well here. Really good tee to green recently, but went out at the Travelers and missed the cut. And the Travelers was a course that he's done well at in the past, and everything's set up really well for him there. Ben Martin, another guy whose stats are popping, but he's a little overpriced on DraftKings, so I'm not really going to go there too much. Not really going to pull his stats up, but yeah, right now I have Ollie and cash. I think I'm going to move off that. Maybe go down to Barnes. It's risky, or I might just play my other lineup and just go one lineup this week, and hope for the best. I'm going to dial it back a little bit this week just because the Open is next week, and I'd like to save my bankroll for that, where I think you can get more of an edge by figuring out who the best links players are, who's in better form for that type of course and that kind of thing. So, for me this week, where I'm going is going to be these guys that I talked about. My favorite plays, run them down, or reads in play, but I wouldn't call them a favorite for the price. Haas, Kisner, Webb, Lingmerth. Howell is all right. Lee, Bradley, Henley is all right. Finau, Streelman, Hahn, KOKRAK, DeLaet, Schauffele, Woodland, Schniederjans. I don't know what I'm doing with him yet. I don't really see him going out and getting the upside that I want. And I kind of like Ricky Barnes. Take a little risk. Why not? I think Ollie's going to be a little popular in that range anyway. Yeah, so, moving down, English, I worry about him, but, I think he has the game to do all right here. Luck, I think, could do all right here, but rode a hot putter. I don't like that. Cink is a lock and load, baby. Matt Jones is all right, and then, Ricky Barnes, I think, is definitely in play as a very low-dollar guy. And then Ted Potter, GPP play only, but I think, he might be a little more popular than I'd like for someone that plays on the web.com tour usually. So those are going to be my picks this week, guys. I really like KOKRAK in that range on FanDuel. I think he's going to be a very sneaky play this week. I could be wrong, but, you got to take some risks. So my hot takes are a KOKRAK top 10, a Keegan Bradley top 10 again. I'm going to go for the win. I'm going to go with Bill Haas for the win this week. I think it's either Bill Haas or Finau that gets it done. I'd like it to be Haas because I would definitely have him. He's shown he can get close here before, second place here before, Finau out of 13th, so I like that, but I think I'm going to have to go Haas this week. But yeah, I like Finau also for a top 10. I like Danny Lee. I like Lingmerth. I like all these guys. So, will they all finish top 10? No, but I think they're all very safe bets to make the cut. And I know I said that about Steele and Chappell last week, but there was nothing statistically that you would have looked at and said, Steele's going to do badly here, or, Chappell's going to do badly here. So, whatever, it happens. People miss their cash plays sometimes. We saw it at the U.S. Open. Dustin Johnson, the favorite, missed. So, anyway, that's going to do it, guys. Any questions, hit me up on Twitter at mandrews93DFS. I'll have that in the description below. I'll have my favorite plays. I'll have my fades. And yeah, feel free to hit me up on the Twitter machine, and I'll answer your questions. If you could like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to do this every week, like I said. So if you guys can get the word out there, I'd like to join up with the podcast and, get some more people giving me some input here and talking when we have this debate, it's like DeLaet, Streelman, Schauffele at that same price range on FanDuel. Give us a little ranking action and see where we want to be on these guys, because I feel like that always helps to make the decisions. Or, when you're down there, do you like Ricky Barnes in cash? Is that a play that you can go with? It's one that I think is risky, so I'm not sold if I want to go there, but I can see the reasoning behind it, just based on the recent form for the guy. So, it's a risk, but it's one I'm willing to take this week, I think. So, Yeah. Well, let's get it done, and hope to see you for the Open. Let's get 6 of 6 and 8 of 8. All right, boys. Have a good week.